Your most common risk for overdose is reduced tolerance. So if you haven't used for about 3 or 4 days, a lot of the opiates have now left the receptors where they build up. That's what creates tolerance. So you're at a much higher risk. What causes that is incarceration, jail, prison, anything over 3 days, or abstinence-based treatment. So if you are leaving a treatment program, whether it be through the criminal justice system or on your own, and you're not using any type of medication-assisted treatment, your tolerance is down, you're at 120% higher risk to experience an overdose. Same goes with once you're leaving jail or prison after a certain amount of time, after 3 or 4 days, you're now at 120% risk to experience an overdose. Mixing drugs. Benzos are our biggest danger when it comes to opioid overdoses. So we are mixing benzos, or benzodiazepines, drugs such as Xanax, Valium, Ativan, everything that falls in that class of drugs. That drug also suppresses the respiratory system, as does alcohol. So if you mix opiates with benzos or alcohol, you are greatly increasing your risk to experience an overdose. We have what we call harm reduction survival rules that everybody needs to follow. Those rules are very simple. A, do not use alone. Rule number 1. Do not use alone. 2, always carry Narcan. 3, taste your shot. What that means in slang terms is you can do a little bit now, and then you can do more later. Purity is changing constantly, even from the same batch. One capsule, one bag could have a different concentration than another bag. Okay, and the 4th one is, since we're following rule 1 and we are not using alone, stagger your use by about ½ an hour between individuals. I know it sounds difficult because that rush to use is very powerful, but we've all seen the stories in the newspaper about 2 people died from apparent overdose, 2 bodies found. What happened? They didn't follow rule 4. They used it at the same time, and they both overdosed at the same time, and they couldn't save each other's life. If you're in a situation where you have to use alone, and it happens, there's other things we can do. First thing you can do is create a buddy system. You text somebody and say, I'm about to use, if I don't shoot you a text every 10 minutes for the next hour, call 911 to my location. Second one is use it in a public place, public bathroom, where the stalls have the bottom cut out, where if you fall down, somebody will find you. The last thing you ever want to do is lock yourself in a bathroom at some gas station who doesn't check the bathroom once every 12 hours. We are losing way too many people because they're not following those simple rules. So please, from here on out, we hope everybody finds recovery. However, if you decide to pick up again, follow these rules, and you will survive long enough to get back into recovery. Opiates are not a drug that you sleep off, ever. So if anybody is so intoxicated by opiates that they're literally, because remember, we're slowing down the breathing, so there's less oxygen to the brain. That's how people become unconscious, through anesthesia, a lot of other things. So that's what's happening with opiates. So if somebody is so intoxicated that they're literally standing up and they're hunched over like this, because people will get to that point, the last thing in the world you want to do is say, go to bed. What you do in those situations is you have them sit on the couch, and every time they fall over, you push them. Every time they fall over, you push them. You do that until enough of the drugs have worn off where they are no longer so losing lack of oxygen to the brain so much that they're in that state. Because that is a very dangerous spot for an opiate-dependent person to be in. They're at a high risk of overdose at that point. So the 3 protocols we take when somebody overdoses is we call 911, we start rescue breathing, and we administer Narcan. 911 is important to call, especially if somebody's going to need multiple doses of Naloxone, or if there's a chance they could fall into a secondary overdose, which happens. In Missouri right now, we have what's called the 9/11 Good Samaritan Law. So the overt act of calling 911 will turn that law on for you and the person that is experiencing the overdose. So you have to call 911. And what happens then is that the law is activated. And when the police arrive, they cannot arrest you for possession, paraphernalia, possession of a look-alike substance, or keeping a place of nuisance. Keeping a place of nuisance was important to put in there in this legislation because a lot of people will be using what we call vacos, which are vacant properties, so they actually can't arrest you for being there. So we wanted to remove all fear from being arrested. Also, if you're on probation or parole, that overdose event of you calling 911, which is obviously a violation of your probation because you're using an illegal substance, they cannot use that event to violate your probation or parole. Also, Another one in there is restraining orders. A lot of times in addiction, we have people that we have toxic relationships with, and we get restraining orders against each other. If you have a restraining order against, or one's against you with the person you're using, that overdose event cannot be used to violate the restraining order. Next thing we do is rescue breathing. Rescue breathing is very simple. Now, we do not do chest compressions when dealing with an opiate overdose. Opiates don't tell the heart anything. Sometimes they do, but as lay people, we are not going to know. The most important thing to know is that the opiates will have signals in the brain to your respiratory system, your lungs, to slow down or stop. That is why people are dying from overdoses, and that is why rescue breathing is crucial. And then the third thing you do is administer Narcan. You will either get the nasal Narcan or an intramuscular injection with a vial and a needle. They all operate on the same basic principle. None is better or worse than the other. It just depends on the situation. People that are scared of needles, grandma, mom and dad, somebody early in recovery that doesn't want to have a needle laying around, the nasal is a great option. But somebody actively using, the vial is a good option for them, and it is more cost effective. For people to understand, Naloxone reverses all opiates. On your low end of the spectrum, codeine, all the way to your strong end of the spectrum, fentanyl and all the fentanyl analogs such as carfentanil, acetylfentanyl, butyrylfentanyl. Narcan works on everything. There is no such thing as a Narcan-resistant opioid or a Narcan-resistant fentanyl. It displaces the opiates in the brain, any opiate. You just might need a little bit more. So how does the Narcan work? So those opiates enter the receptors in the brain. They signal to the lungs to slow down or stop, and those opiates are lodged in those receptors. When Narcan passes the blood-brain barrier, what happens is those receptors want Narcan more than anything that's in there right now. So it will kick out the heroin, the oxycodone, the fentanyl, and then the Narcan will take its place. Now the Narcan just sits in the receptors and doesn't do anything. However, we no longer have any heroin or opiates in those receptors. We no longer have a signal to the lungs to slow down, and the person typically resumes breathing within about 30 seconds to 2 minutes. You may need multiple doses of Narcan, and that's okay. The only caveat there is that you have to use a different route of administration, or point of administration, sorry. So if you use this nostril on the first dose, you got to use this nostril. If you use this big muscle on the first injection, you have to go to this one, and so on and so on. So the order we do this will vary. It's 911, rescue breathing, Narcan. Okay, if I'm with somebody and I see them fall out, I have time to call 911. Tell them you have an opioid overdose. They're going to try to keep you on the phone because that's what 911 does. Explain you're going to administer Narcan and put the phone down and go over to the person. You give them one good breath. I'll show you that in a second, and then you administer Narcan. After you administer Narcan, you keep on doing rescue breathing on that individual for 2 minutes. And if they do not wake up within about 2 minutes, you give them the second dose of Narcan. After that second dose, you continue breathing for them, and you do not stop breathing for them until they wake up or the ambulance arrives. Another situation, I get home, you get home, you see somebody that is unconscious. You suspect it's an overdose. The first thing you do is give them Narcan. Then you give them a good breath. You call 911. You let them know you've had an overdose. You go back to the person. You continue rescue breathing. If they're not up within 2 minutes, you give them that second dose of Narcan. You keep on breathing for them until they wake up or the ambulance arrives. If you have more than 2 doses, you keep on giving them Narcan at 2-minute intervals. All right, so we're going to demonstrate our 2 types of Narcan that are most used, which is the nasal and the IM injection. Okay, so for rescue breathing, it's very simple. You have to create an arch with the neck. You can do that by putting your hand on the forehead or by lifting the neck with your fingers. You have to create this arch or you could suffocate them. It doesn't have to be an extreme arch as this guy, but you just have to know that you're doing it. So you do that, you pinch the nose, and it's 1 breath every 7 seconds. That's rescue breathing, also known as BLS, basic life support. All right, and then for the Naloxone, for the nasal, they're very easy to use. It's a little tester right here. So after I've done a good breath, I administer the Narcan in the nose, and I push the button. and that's it. The person does not have to be breathing in order for the Narcan to work. It does not process through the lungs. It actually processes through the membranes in the nose. And for the vial, the injection is going to go in a big muscle. So for most lay people, your most easy to access big muscles are going to be the leg, the butt, or the upper arm. Now the needles we give with intramuscular Narcan, these are not the same needles that people inject drugs with, so you don't have to really be worried about that. The gauge is much bigger. This will actually go through clothes. Okay, so sometimes people will have difficulties in the beginning with getting the all this liquid out of this little vial, but there's a little trick. So you get this vial, pop off the cap. Okay, so what you do is you're going to pull the plunger down all the way. Now you're going to, if you can see right, kind of, my needle is right, really just barely in there. I can see it, but it's right in the neck. I push this up and I let go, and the air pressure is going to draw that in all the way. So in about the amount of time it took me to get the nasal in there, I've actually just loaded the syringe. Air bubbles are not inherently dangerous. That's old wives' tale, but you do want to get them out because they will cause resistance. So you bring that up to the bottom, and if he had legs, I would go right in the leg, and then I would inject the liquid. So I've just administered Narcan either through IM or through nasal, then I resume my rescue breathing. 1 breath every 7 seconds. Explain to them they just overdosed. You gave them Narcan. Narcan wears off between 45 and 70 minutes. It has a very short half-life. So in about an hour, they are going to be high again. Remind them that if they use right now, they're probably going to overdose, and they just have to stay calm, and in an hour, they will be high again. Now, when that drugs come back, there is a danger, very small risk of them experiencing a secondary overdose without using any more drugs. If that does happen, we just repeat everything we just did all over again. You just re-administer Narcan. But hopefully, if you have called 911, the ambulance is there, the EMTs are there, and they're going to be under medical care at that time. All right, let's talk about some rumors that are spreading around these days. The first one is this person that just woke up from an overdose wakes up angry like the Hulk, and they're going to start attacking innocent people. It's not true. I'm going to give you an example. If I know the person that I'm using with on the streets, we say we're running together, I've known him for a while, and I get reversed and I wake up sick and I see my friend's face, I'm not going to wake up swinging. I see a familiar face. I say this so people aren't afraid. If it's your child, a sibling, a spouse, another loved one, you should have no fear about reversing their overdose, because odds are they will not wake up angry at you, waking up violent. Now in another situation where we have seen this is somebody does overdose. So the best way to describe an overdose real quick so we can understand how the person feels, it's like falling asleep in school. Now this is describing an overdose with a reversal, because if there's no reversal, there's no way to describe it except you pass away. It's like falling asleep in school. So I'm sitting there at my desk, I'm looking at my teacher, the next thing I know I go like this. You have no idea you were about to fall asleep, and then you just jerk up. That's exactly what an overdose feels like. However, you wake up sick. So when that head jerks up and I see that familiar face, they're going to start talking to me and explaining it to me, and I'm going to be calm. I'm going to feel horrible, but hopefully I'm educated. The person that was overdosed and reversed is educated enough to understand what's happening, and they can remain calm. In another situation, we may see somebody overdose, and the next thing they know, they'll wake up in the back of an ambulance with 6 strangers standing over them. That's a situational response. The person wakes up scared. So we do have some very, very limited, only anecdotal reports of that happening on the rarest of occasions. But just be aware, and that only happens in those situations. So as a loved one, you have no fear about reversing somebody's overdose. Second fear that we need to just dispel right now, another rumor, is the fentanyl rumor. You cannot overdose from coming into contact with powder fentanyl. It does not happen. So I say that because I don't want you to be scared that my son just overdosed. I'm not going to go try to save his life because I saw something on Facebook the other day that a police officer in Ohio went like this and they overdosed. It's medically impossible. In order for fentanyl or any drug to penetrate the skin, it has to be in a transdermal formula. That's terms for a skin formula. Then it also has to be in a transdermal patch. Then it has to be applied to the skin. And it has to sit there for at least 15 minutes for things to start to warm up, for it to actually pass through the skin and then get into the blood, and then pass the blood-brain barrier. The equivalent to these rumors are me taking a cigarette, taking out all the tobacco and rubbing it in my hands, and thinking that this is going to work as effectively as a nicotine patch. Unfortunately, when we're faced with a public health epidemic like we are with opioids, like we have been with HIV, we get these wild stories. I correlate this to the HIV rumors in the 80s that you could get AIDS by sitting on a toilet. The fentanyl rumors hold the same validity as those rumors about HIV in the late 80s. So please do not be scared to go help somebody in absence of a hazmat suit, because it is not true. People will tell you that Narcan enables drug use. That is simply not true. Narcan enables one thing and one thing only, and that's breathing. I myself have been in recovery from heroin addiction for 7 years. I shot heroin probably more than 10,000 times in my life. Whether Narcan was there or not, I did not care. I was using that day. People have to understand that those anecdotal rumors that, oh, they're going to use more. Let me explain that to you. Somebody, myself, many years ago, is already injecting 0.3 of a gram of a substance that could kill me. So Narcan is there, so now they're scared that I'm going to inject 4, maybe 0.5 of a gram of a substance that can kill me. They fail to realize that I'm already injecting a substance that can kill me, whether Narcan is there or not. So we do not use anymore. In fact, sometimes we use less, because when I'm in active addiction, I don't fear death. As crazy as that sounds, we have this distorted perception of being invincible, despite the fact that people are dying left and right. We still have that perception. But I do fear withdrawals. So I know if my friend is there and they have Narcan, and I know that if I overdose, all the money I just spent is going to get wasted. I'm going to wake up sick. That's the last thing in the world I want. So actually, some people will use less when they know Narcan is present. With the wide availability of Narcan, there's no reason for anybody that has a loved one or themselves has struggled with opiate use disorder not to carry it. So who should carry Narcan? Everybody that is struggling with opiate use disorder. Everybody has a loved one. Rule of thumb, it would be anybody that has a year or less in recovery should have it on them. Their family should have it. Everybody should be trained to know how to use it. A friend of mine graduated drug court on Thursday night. Post on Facebook how proud she was to graduate drug court. She died yesterday. That quick. And we actually trained that drug court that she was in. So this is real life. There are other people I know that I care about died this week. So no one's immune. The most 3 dangerous words we can use is not my kid. So make sure no matter who you are, what is going on, you have access to this.